Okay, welcome to part 6. In the previous part we coded this sort of simple HTML form and talked about databases. In this part we're going to create the code to process this form and actually create the message, i.e. insert the rows into the table. So what we're going to do is go to our code and we're going to, right at the very top, we're going to add a big PHP block like so, and then in here we're going to check to see if the form has been submitted, so i.e. if is set post to post subject post body, not persot, post body. And if it has, we're going to do some sort of error checking, and then we're going to submit the form if necessary. Okay, so that's that done. So first thing we're going to do inside this block here is do a little bit of error checking. So what we're going to do is to find an errors array, which is what I sort of always do now. If I can remember how to spell errors. Okay, so this is going to be equal to a new array, like so. And then this errors array, or this array, is going to contain all of our error messages that happen on this form submission. And then a bit further down the page, we're going to display them all, sort of in a big list. So the first condition we're going to check is to make sure the to box isn't empty. So I'm going to do if empty post to. I'm going to add something to the errors array here. So errors, like so. And the message we're going to add is you must enter at least one name. Why not? It's fairly straightforward. The second condition is going to check to see if the subject is empty, and then the same for the body. So just code these out in the same way. So if empty post subject errors equals the subject, not quite what I typed, the subject cannot be empty, M-O-T, empty, yeah, okay, good, and add punctuation, and the same for the body. So what I could do is just copy this down for the sake of time, like so, and then the body here. Okay, so these two, subject and body, these two things are sort of fine as they are. All we can do for, well, I mean, obviously you can add more validation to this if you feel like you need to. So one thing you might want to do is check to see if there are like an excessive number of links, which is sort of something someone might do for spamming. You could also include the stop forum spam check with the username, which would be a bit pointless because you should really do that on registration, but that's just something you might want to think about. I think I've done a video on that. I can't really remember, but go look, go search. So the subject and the body are kind of fine to leave at basic validation, i.e. just making sure they're required. I've also done persot again. So just fix these. Right, oops. Okay. However, the list of users you want to send the message to, does have to have slightly more strict validation. For one thing, we kind of need to check the form of it to make sure it looks a bit like a comma-separated list. And also we need to make sure that all of the users that are entered actually exist. Because otherwise people might start sending, what will happen is we'll get in the conversation members table a list of users that are members of conversations that don't actually exist and can never reply to them and can never delete them, so that data will just be stuck in the table forever, basically. And also, what might happen is that someday some user might register with the same ID or the same name or something like that, and they will just have loads of messages appear, which would be a bit weird for them. So one thing we definitely need to do is make sure that all of the users entered actually exist and have valid user IDs. So the way we're going to do that is fairly straightforward, and I'll explain it as we go along because it's a bit odd in a way, but anyway. So what we need to do is, if this check has passed, so we can just add another check here, so else if, because obviously if the user ID is empty, i.e. this error has happened, there's no point then checking to see if that user exists, because it just won't. It's not going to happen. So we're only doing one of the, well, we're only showing one error message for the to field is what's actually happening. Anyway, the second check is we're going to do is to make a sort of fairly basic check on the form of the username. Sorry, the form of this value. So we're going to use a regular expression to do this because that's a fairly good thing to use for this. So we're going to do if preg match, or preg, which I kind of prefer. So the preg match function will return the number of matches. So what we're going to do is check to see if it is equal to 0, i.e. no matches, and then we're going to show an error. Well, we're going to add an error. So the pattern that we want to match is one of a comma-separated list of letters and spaces. So this is, well, I'm just assuming this is what you would have used for your username validation on registration. Obviously, you should include whatever characters are valid username characters, and commas, and also spaces, because some people like to do their lists instead of like thing, they like to have spaces. I'm one of those people. I like spaces. Spaces are good. Anyway, the regular expression we're going to be using is, well, what's going to be in that first parameter. Second parameter is the string you want to try and apply that expression to. So this can be post to. And the actual expression we're using, well, it has to be delimited, so it has to have something that's the same at either end. After this thing, this character, you can specify a number of modifiers. So I'm going to specify I, which just means case insensitive, so we don't have to like type A to Z in capitals and in lowercase. We can just do it in lowercase and it'll still match. So what we want to match is a comma separated list, like I said. So we want to match the whole string, so I'm going to add the start of the string, which is represented by that weird arrow, shift and 6 if you're wondering, and also the end of the string, which is the dollar symbol, shift and 4 for a UK keyboard. Don't even know why I said that, but well, whatever. Okay, so in between these we can apply a expression to the entire string. So the characters we want to match, we're going to do a very simple expression. It's just going to match like a valid list of characters. So we're going to match A to Z, commas and spaces, and we want to have at least one character, although that is already validated by the empty thing, so it's not really necessary. Okay, so just inside here what we've done is determine that the user hasn't, or looks like they have invented, inputted, I guess is what I'm trying to say, inserted, submitted, I don't know, sort of invalid looking data. So the message we're going to send is I don't know, the list of names you gave does not look valid. Wow, I spelled that entirely wrong. Oh no, not too bad. Okay, good. Okay, so the final check is going to be here inside this else block, and this is going to be the check to see if all of the users actually exist. And we're actually going to do a little bit of work here as well towards sending the message, but that's not too much of a problem because it's still fairly neat, fairly clean. Okay, so the reason we're not doing this inside a check here, i.e. else if something, is because we actually need to get the user IDs for the user names, and this requires a bit more code. So we need to split the list of names into an actual list, as in an array, instead of just a string. So the way we do that is by using explode. So I'm going to define a new variable here called user names, which is going to be equal to explode on the comma, and the string we're going to be exploding is the post to string. One thing you could do instead of this is use another regular expression to match all A to Z strings. However, I'm just doing it this way because it's a little bit simpler, and we've already done a regular expression, so doing another one would be a bit boring. Anyway, the disadvantage of this method is what I'm about to demonstrate, is that if someone does input a comma separated list with spaces, there will be a space at either the beginning or the start of each username in this list. So what we need to do to get around that is to loop over the usernames by doing a for each loop like so. So name, and we'll just do name equals trim, trim name, like that. And all that will do is remove any sort of trailing or preceding, I guess, white space from the name. The reason we've got this and symbol here is that this means pass by reference, or by reference, I guess I should say. That should be usernames. So all that means is that whatever you do to the variable name, which just comes from here, inside this for each loop, will actually directly affect the array value, instead of just applying to the name variable, or whatever variable you've chosen. So it's just a little bit of a neater way of doing it than the alternative, which would be using the full array here and the key. But yeah, whatever, it doesn't really make much difference. Okay, so without, well, if we were to use the regular expression method of just matching all sort of strings like so, we wouldn't need this for each loop. But it doesn't really matter too much, to be honest. Okay, so what we've got now is a list of names that we want to send the message to as an array. So what we want to do is get the user IDs that that correspond to this list of names. So we want to get the ID for each user. So we're going to create a new function called fetch user IDs, and this is going to be part of the user backend file, because it's part of the user system really, but it's getting user IDs. It's going to be querying the users table. So let's go ahead and create that function now. Let's go to our user.inc.php file, and let's create a new function underneath this one. So function fetch user IDs, user names is the parameter, which is going to be that array that we just created, i.e. the list of usernames. So each of these names needs to be escaped because it's going to be passed directly into a MySQL string. So we need another for each loop here. For each user names as name, like so. And we're going to escape each name inside this string, inside this loop, sorry. So name equals MySQL real escape string of name. Okay? So now everything in that array should be safe to use inside of a query. So the query we're going to do is a MySQL query, so we're going to use the MySQL query function, not the query function, query, passing in a string, and what we're going to do is select the user ID and the user name as it is in the database from the users table, where the user name is one of the ones in this array. And the way we can do that is by using the MySQL in keyword, and then this takes sort of as its parameter, if you like, a list of comma separated strings. So what we want to generate is something that looks a bit like this. So so name 1 could be me, and name 2 could be Bob. So that's what we want to generate, and we want to generate that from this array. So what we want is a value inside each of these. So what we can actually do is take this part out and implode on it. So you can see that if I take that part out, we actually get a value, or one string element. If we were to put one of those between each array element, so imagine a list, so that would be the first element, this would be the second one, paste it again, we get valid 3 elements, paste it again, we get valid 4 elements. So that's sort of why this works. I've had a bit of trouble explaining that before, but I think it sort of makes sense. So what we can do is use the implode function, just by joining a string on like this. We just use implode, and we're imploding that thing that I kept pasting a minute ago, and we're using the user names array. And that will just select all of the user IDs and user names where the username is one of those usernames. So what essentially we're doing is, well, consider a username in that list that is not valid. No row will be returned for that user. So there you go, that's that. Fairly straightforward. So what we can do now is use this result to generate an array of usernames and their keys. Sorry, not their keys, their IDs. So what we're going to do is actually store this result first, because we're going to need to loop over it. So result equals, and then down here we're going to create a new array called names. Oh wow, that's really wrong. Bit strange. Anyway, so we need to loop over the query result by using a while loop. So we'll do while row equals MySQL fetch a sock of the result, and while that's not equal to false, we're going to add something to this names array. So if we were to just do this, for example, user ID, what we'd get is a list of user IDs, which is fine, that'd be okay. However, we kind of need to know which user names correspond to which user IDs, and that's why we also selected the user name up here, because when we come to the validation part, we'll need to know which names were specified aren't in this list of IDs. I'll get to that probably in the next part by now. But anyway, let's just add this. What we're going to do to accomplish this is add the user name as the key of this array. So I'll demonstrate by example. So if I just do a row user name like so, what this will do is use the name, which would be Bob, for example, and then the value would be Bob's ID. So this array, what we're doing in that line there with the names equals thingy, is the same as doing names Bob equals Bob's user ID. So that's the kind of array we're going to have after this loop, obviously with all the users though. Okay, and the final thing we need to do is just return names. Okay, so that's this function pretty much complete. I think I'm going to leave this here, and then in the next part we will go over how to actually use this function, and then I'll explain the validation that we use based on this list of IDs. Okay, so that's that, and thank you for watching, and come back for the next part.